I'm Steve Sobek, and it is my honor to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Jerry Bergman. The title of his presentation is Refuting the Scientific Evidence for Human Evolution at the Time of the 1925 Scopes Monkey Trial. Dr. Bergman is a multi-award-winning teacher and author. His over 1,900 publications are in both scholarly and popular science journals. Dr. Bergman's work has been translated into 14 languages, including French, German, Italian, Spanish, Danish, Polish, Czech, Chinese, Portuguese, Arabic, and Swedish. His books, and books that include chapters that he authored, are in over 2,500 college libraries in 65 countries. So far, 80,000 copies of the 60 books and monographs that he has authored or co-authored are in print. Bergman has spoken over 2,000 times to college, university, and church groups in America, Canada, Europe, the South Sea Islands, and Africa. His past experience includes speaker and researcher for the Institute for Creation Research. Professor Bergman taught biology, genetics, biochemistry, anatomy, and physiology, plus other courses at the college level for over 40 years. He served on both the undergraduate and graduate faculty at Bowling Green State University, the University of Toledo, and the Medical College of Ohio. His 9 earned degrees include a doctorate from Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. After completing his medical education, he was hired full-time doing cancer research in the Department of Experimental Pathology at the Medical College of Ohio. One of Dr. Bergman's most recent books is titled The Other Side of the Scopes Monkey Trial. You may recall that the attorneys defending schoolteacher John Scopes brought several evolutionary scientists to the trial to serve as expert witnesses. The judge did not allow the jurors to hear their testimony, but knowing that the verdict was going to be appealed to the federal courts, all of the scientific testimony was carefully recorded and can be read word for word in a book titled The World's Most Famous Court Trial. The attorneys described the testimony of these evolutionary experts as facts. Bergman will explain today that the scientists' interpretations of the evidence were flat out wrong, and that the fossil evidence for human evolution cited in the documents of the Scopes trial has all now been debunked by the peer-reviewed scientific literature. One of the experts in the Scopes trial, Dr. Cole, anthropologist from the University of Chicago, argued that the many useless organs found in humans is evidence for evolution. Dr. Bergman will explain today that the evolutionists were wrong about every one of those supposed useless organs. One by one, every human organ has been found to have a purpose. Whether you are an evolutionist or a creationist, you will be astonished as Dr. Bergman argues how wrong the evolutionary scientists at the 1925 Scopes trial were about the major evidence used to support belief in human evolution. Without further delay, here is Dr. Jerry Bergman.
One important aspect of the trial is the enormous amount of negative cartoon lambasting publicity that came as a result. And I have a few examples here which I will go through briefly. There are hundreds of examples. I have a whole file folder full of examples, but here's a few of my favorite. Notice the basic theme is creationists are ignorant, stupid, evolutionists are smart and have the right answers. And here's the first one. The famous 3 monkeys, don't hear it, don't see it, don't think it, and that is, of course, evolution. Is creationists say, or the Scopes trial says, don't think about it, don't see it, don't hear it. And the next slide is Williams Jennings Bryan, and he points to this sign, thou shalt not think, and this poor little boy is looking at that and saying, gee, maybe I should think. So in essence, creationists are not thinking, we are just blindly accepting a worldview where evolutionists, they're implying, are thinking. Another example, here's a man carrying his son through the mud, and the man is carrying a fundamentalist, of course, anti-Darwinist, carrying the sign, "Down with education." And the young boy says, "Pa, must we wait around in this mud all of our lives?" And the mud is creation, labeled as superstition. Again, tree of knowledge, there it is, evolution, etc. The children in front of it, and this preacher, this fundamentalist, says, "Nope, you're not welcome to partake of this tree." Another example, evolution occurring. This is another example. You can see evolution occurring from a frog to caveman, and right above the caveman is a clown who basically says in his piece of paper there, creationism versus science, and of course they're implying that science is correct, creationism is silly, like a clown. Another example, the same thing. You can see evolution there, and in the middle is a creationist who looks like a silly young man, or worse. Of interest is that all of these claimed missing links have now been totally disregarded by science. Another example, which brain was given to the intelligent design supporter? And you can see A, large brain, B, large brain, C, a very small brain. Proof of evolution, same thing, brain of man, large, Neanderthal, smaller. Actually, the brain of Neanderthal was larger, slightly on the average, than the brain of man. And then brain of Homo erectus, again, that's wrong, but brain of an ape, well, that's probably correct. And then the smallest of all is the brain of the creationist. Again, making fun of our intelligence. This is an example where the Pope condoned the teaching of human evolution, and you can see science in that big book was thrown on top of the creationist and the intelligent design supporter, because science proves our worldview is wrong. Another example, evolution, all the facts on one side, lots of facts. On the other side, no facts at all, but a fundamentalist putting his arm on the scale to try to equalize the two. It's another example. This is a paper that is meant to be comedy. The headline is science being taught in our schools? Question mark. Should children be exposed to facts? And of course, in fact, children were not exposed to facts. They were exposed to fiction, which I will present shortly. Another example, evolution occurring, and at the top we can see a highest form of evolution evidently, and then of course right after him is we should teach creationism in our schools, the sign says, and that is a funny looking, supposed to be creationist. Another example is a witch doctor comes in, and now class, your new science teacher will explain intelligent design. Again, putting down the intelligent design worldview. Another example, here's a man who's applying for a biology position at the school, and he has an apple and a snake reminiscent of course, the Garden of Eden. This is a chart which is very useful because it shows that in many countries, the vast majority, 80%, in the first example, believes that human beings evolved from lower forms of life. The lowest number who accept that are USA and Turkey. USA is slightly above Turkey in the number of people, which is about 40% in this country, accept, only 40% accept the evolution of humans. And Turkey is even less, and I could mention the Muslim countries as a whole are even less. The Muslim teaching is very clear. They accept Adam and Eve in the Bible. Another example, there's a Bible. This is not a science book. The sign says, trying to basically demean what the Bible has to say about science. Mencken, this gives you an idea of the derogatory ideas in this case, that Mencken had to say about Brian. He leads a new crusade. One somehow pities him, Brian, despite his so palpable imbecilities. But let no one laughing at him underestimate his frayed but still eloquent voice. Brian, referring to Brian, can shake and inflame those poor ignoramuses, the creationist, as no other man among us. These are two well-known books about the Scopes trial. The one on the right is the Great Monkey Trial, which says science versus fundamentalism. Again, science on one side, fundamentalism on the other side. Science versus religion. This whole book is about this issue. And then next to this is my book called The Other Side of the Scopes Monkey Trial, showing it was not science versus religion, but what it was at its core, it was about racism. And that is widely recognized by the facts if you look into the facts. Okay, Brian was called the commoner, and he expressed concerns about the Negro, that's the word he used, population, stressing that educational advantages should be open to both races. He said this in 1902, 50 years before the Civil Rights Movement. So this was, at that time, quite radical. But it illustrates Brian's perception was all the races are descendants of Adam and Eve, therefore they're all equal, therefore blacks should be treated the same as whites. Full equality in every area of life. This is an example of what was taught in the 1920s, and we can see 4 ape men, or less evolved men, in front of the most evolved man, and all of these have been clearly disapproved, proven wrong by science. And I will give you an example. And these pictures, by the way, were done by the American Museum of Natural History, and so they were widely distributed in many textbooks, as this was. This is Java Man. This is the first one in the series. Java Man is based purely on a skull cap. That's it, just the top part of the skull. And you can see a plaster cast of a model of Java Man, and you can see they have the whole man based on this simple skull cap. These are the bones they found, the femur specifically, and now we know that these bones they found were from not an ape man of any type, but from modern man. And so they mixed a skull cap, which is rather undefined, and femurs of a human that was mixed together, and they created from this Java Man, which has now been thoroughly shown to be incorrect. And this summarizes what they had. All they had was the upper cranium and a femur. How could his skin color, his hair, his body, etc., be based on such little findings? And you can see from that picture of Java Man, looks like they have the whole body, or at least the whole skeleton, and in fact, they don't. And so in many ways, these fossil evidences were small bone fragments and lots of imagination. And there you can see in the center there, Java Man again, looking more like a monkey, but nonetheless, it was produced by somebody's imagination. And Dubois was the one who actually found this, and he called it Pithecanthropus erectus. And this was the missing link, supposedly, between man and the apes. Conclusion, this is from a leading textbook. Conclusion is basically, despite all effort, Java Man has now been thrown out because it is no longer accepted in any way as a transitional form between apes and humans. And remember, this was featured in the trial. And there is a book about Java Man in which I obtained this quote from, and he makes it very clear that this is false. Piltdown Man is another example. Piltdown Man is probably one of the most famous frauds in history. You can see they have part of the skull. You can see part of it's white and part of it's darker. The part that's darker is the part that they have, and from that we have developed a whole man called Piltdown Man. And this is a picture of the leading scientists pondering Piltdown. And these are the leading paleontologists back then thinking about Piltdown Man. And ironically, that has been shown to be, as you can see from this picture, which is incorrect, but again, we have a whole man, in this case, the face, the skull, the profile, from a few bone fragments. And the picture next to it talks about the different fragments that we had. And there we can see this is called Fossil Man of Sussex. Well, we know it as Piltdown Man. And now it has been carefully unraveled, and the book on the left you can see, Unraveling Piltdown. The question is not whether it's a forgery, because it was. The question is who done it. And the second book on the other side, on the right, Piltdown Hoax, Who Done It. And probably Dawson did it. That's probably the conclusion, but it hasn't been fully proven that he did it. Neanderthal Man is the next example they used at the Scopes trial. And there we can see a painting of Neanderthal Man, very famous painting, by the way. And that is showing you what Neanderthal Man looked like. Very primitive, very un-modern man-like, very primitive. And there's a drawing of what they thought Neanderthal Man looked like. And there you can see Neanderthal Man, different poses. Clearly, very ape-like, not modern man-like. And now today we have been able to take skulls and put a face on them. And there are many examples. One famous example I'm aware of is that they found skeleton of a female in Nebraska. And then no information about who she was, when she died. They thought she died about 5 years ago, judging by the skeleton. But the skeleton was taken to a restorer. The skeleton then was added. They added the parts so that they could get her face and part of her body, and that conclusion was published in the paper. They were trying to find out who she was. And a woman from California called in and said, that was my neighbor. She disappeared about 5 years ago, and indeed, the neighbor who called in, it was her neighbor who was the woman who disappeared. And the husband went on trial and was found guilty of first-degree murder because they found out he had murdered his wife and buried her in Nebraska. And so the accuracy is enormous. And that illustration is a good example of how accurate they are. And now we have two examples of Neanderthal Man, and this caption below that says, Neanderthal Man is all dressed up and nowhere to go. And the girl on the other side is a better example because they built the face onto the skull. And as a result, this is what she looked like. And so if she was walking around today, you would probably be able to recognize her. There she is. She looks fully normal, not at all ape-like, as has been commonly pictured. Another example, a male, they reconstructed from the bones they found, very modern-looking man. And now National Geographic, and of course if National Geographic says it, it must be true. I'm being facetious. But they said in this article that this is the other human. Basically, Neanderthals was another people group, just like you and I. They were fully modern in every way. They were not a missing link. So there we have it. All evidence they had of human evolution has been clearly, unequivocally disproved by modern science. So who was right? The creationists were right. The evolutionists were wrong in all three counts. And you can see another example of how ape-like they looked. Also, you'll notice that the facial traits are very negroid. And this is a concern that I have because I'm from Detroit. And the reason that it's a concern is because, unfortunately, evolution has often pictured our relatives, our primitive relatives, as very negroid, very, we understand today, we recognize today, very racist. And other examples exist as well. This is Cro-Magnon man, and this was also mentioned at the Scopes trial, and there you can see the center is Cro-Magnon man, a missing link between the apes and modern man, and there you can see a picture from Life magazine, and the middle guy is Cro-Magnon man. And now this picture I selected because that's Cro-Magnon man, and this picture says basically it could be you. So what's the difference between you and Cro-Magnon man? None. They are just a different people group, and so the last and the fourth example they used to prove evolution at the Scopes trial has been proven wrong by science. Yet it's still in the cartoon pictures, and you can see the best example is the head looks very ape, the body looks very modern. And when I present this presentation at schools and other places, invariably the guys look at that and they say, boy, I wish I had a body that looked like that. How many guys look that good? And yet these are supposed to be ape men. And they look pretty good, at least according to my students. This is Hesperopithecus. That was actually mentioned at the trial, but the problem was that there was already doubts about the validity of Hesperopithecus. And you can see the man there with the long hair. It was what they produced from, ironically, a couple of teeth. So from these teeth, they produced Hesperopithecus. And that's the drawing that was produced. Well, what evidence do we have now? Well, actually, in 1927, Henry Fairfield Osborn was still pushing the validity of Hesperopithecus. So even though there was doubts about it at the Scopes trial, still it was accepted by some of the leading paleontologists as late as 1927. What was it? Well, there you go. It was based on a couple of teeth. And there's an article in Science next to it, which basically says that this is an exciting discovery. We now have proof of human evolution because we found a very primitive man called Hesperopithecus. Well, as they did more research, they found more teeth actually. They found a lot more teeth that were whole. They weren't partial as these are. And they found that these teeth belonged to a pig, specifically a peccary pig. And that may seem silly, but the fact is that the teeth of pigs are fairly close to the teeth of humans. So it was a mistake, but it wasn't a total idiotic mistake, because now we know that pigs have teeth fairly similar to humans. And that shouldn't surprise us because a number of organs that animals like pigs have are used for transplants because they are the closest that we have to humans. But that, if you think about it, that is good evidence against evolution because, well, why would animals that are so primitive, like pigs, have so many body parts that are just like humans? Well, because they're not primitive, they were created by God. And here is another letter or another article in Nature. And here is another article in Science magazine where they basically apologize for making the mistake. They agreed now that they were wrong, that this was not the teeth of a pre-human, this was the teeth of a peccary. And these charts here, you can see there's a lot of missing links listed, and now today we know that all of these missing links have been shown as false. None of them are evidence of human evolution. And here's another example from a 1927 article showing indeed the claims that were made. And now I did this book a few years ago with Peter Line, who's an expert in this area, and we showed that all of the claims for human ancestry, every one of them are seriously problematic. How we did this was we took each example and we looked in the scientific literature, and the scientific literature for all these examples shows them to be problematic. Well, what's wrong? What's going on here? What's going on is I have my theory, my fossil, and I think mine is valid. You have your theory and your fossil, and you think yours is valid. You criticize my theory for good reason. I criticize your theory for good reason. So in essence, they've criticized each other, and what we have is basically unequivocal evidence that all the beliefs, the theories, are wrong. Now, why are they still accepted? Because they believe in human evolution. If human evolution is true, one of these theories has to be correct. I just say it's mine, you say it's yours. And that is a problem. The next thing that was brought up in the Scopes trial was all these useless organs, the vestigial organs. Very common argument for about a century, and I've studied this in quite a bit of detail. And there's a film here called Vestigial Organs from 100 to None. And this film has been translated in, and my book as well, been translated into Arabic, and you can see that in the picture. And this is an area I've had an interest in, and this is a book I wrote which covers the claims of useless organs, which are known as vestigial organs. In short, there are none left. And so all of these organs we have found very important uses. So the Scopes trial was based on ignorance, us not knowing what these organs did. But now we know what they do, and so that has demolished the whole idea of vestigial organs. Same thing with poor design. There's lots of claims that our body's poorly designed, and I show that these claims are simply not true. So, Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. Acts 17:26, from one man, Adam, he made every man and woman and every race of humanity, and he spread us over all the earth. So, critically, the Bible has been shown to be correct because we have no clear evidence for human evolution. Brian was very concerned about blacks. I mentioned this earlier. In 1902, I'll quote in more detail his article he wrote in the magazine called The Commoner. And in the article he said, the legal rights of the black man, there can be no question. The Negro is a citizen, and as a citizen he is entitled to all of the guarantees of the federal and state Constitution. He has freedom to speak and write, freedom of conscience, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And those who pushed Jim Crow laws, in the South primarily, wanted to prevent the full integration of people judged inferior racial stock, the blacks, in other words. And he said, this is wrong. The Negro must be educated, the whites for their own good as well as for the Negroes. We must ensure, society must ensure the public schools are open to every child, white and black. Again, 1902. And this did not occur in this country until over half a century later. So Brian was way ahead of his time. Now, why is this a concern? Well, the book used in the Scopes trial was A Civic Biology by George W. Hunter. And I will briefly go through some of the examples. Needless to say, this is probably one of the most racist books ever published since 1900. And eugenics was one of the primary reasons Scopes prosecutor William Jennings Bryan came to oppose the teaching of human evolution. And this is a quote from a leading scholar of Scopes trial. And this is important because he agrees with what I'm saying. But of the hundreds of books that I have on the Scopes trial, rarely do they mention the fact that the central area was racism. It was not science versus religion. It was racism versus Genesis, which teaches we're all sons and gods. Which teaches we're all sons of God. And some quotes from the book. This is from the Civic Biology book. If the stock of domesticated animals can be improved, the health and vigor of the future generations of men and women on the earth might also be improved by applying to them the laws of selection. So if we can select stronger, more meatier cows, why can't we select stronger, healthier men and women by using the same techniques, which is eugenics? And Hunter, that's the author of this book, Civic Biology, he introduces eugenics and jumps into examples which now we know are fallacious, like the Jukes story and the Killicax story. And there you can see the Jukes story of this man. He had a dalliance with a tavern girl and had a bunch of offspring which were drunkards and criminals and so on. Then he married a nice, upright Quaker girl, and all of them became the children became very successful. And there you can see the Killicax family, which this book is about. And interestingly, over and over, they say this woman was illiterate. She couldn't read. And ironically, many pictures show her, as they do here, reading a book. And she had certain preferences. She loved romance, historical fiction. That's what her favorite reading was, although she read quite a few other books. So many of the claims they made were simply not true. And The Races of Man, the Scopes Trial book said on page 251, at the present time there exist upon the earth 5 races or varieties of man, each one very different from the other. There's the Ethiopian or Negroid type, originating in Africa, the Malay or brown race, from the islands of the Pacific, the American Indian, the Mongolian or yellow race, and finally, the highest type of all, the Caucasians, represented by the civilized white inhabitants of Europe and America. So you can see that this 1925 book, from our standard today, clearly, blatantly, openly racist. And then he continues in how this superior race can be produced by sterilizing inferior females and by encouraging superior females to have big families. And you can see I go into quite a bit of detail. One here, a good quote, is that these inferior people, the problem is they're parasites. They cost society huge amounts of money, and therefore we must eliminate them. And Adolf Hitler read this book and similar books like it, and of course we know what happened, the Holocaust. And what he was trying to do was simply apply evolution to society, and that gave us the Holocaust. And the remedy, if such people were lower animals, we would probably kill them off. But we can't do that. So therefore, what we need to do is sterilize, prevent intermarriage with inferior individuals. And I cover this in detail in my book on Hitler and the Nazi Darwinian worldview. So to summarize, Hunter believed that society could perfect the human race by preventing intermarriage between people that were mentally ill, criminals, epileptics, and so on. He also believed that the Caucasian race was the highest type of all races. And you can see this in this book published about this time. We start out with fish, and the highest type would be Caucasians. Right below us would be the Negroid. Below that would be the apes. Clearly racist. This is in a Life magazine picture. Clearly racist. And this is a picture of the Scopes trial. There's Williams Jennings Bryan and his supporters. And there you can see Bryan and Darrow conferring together. And there's a courtroom. Very hot. And there's Scopes. Recommended books. There's the Scopes trial, of course, my book, which covers a lot of this. Inherit the Wind by Dr. David Menton. It does a good job showing Inherit the Wind was grossly inaccurate. And David Menton also did a book called Inherit the Wind, a historical analysis. Apes as Ancestors covers the claims today, which I wrote. Slaughter of the Dissidents discusses the problems that arrived from the Scopes trial, because when the Scopes trial occurred, this began a fad criticizing, making fun of those who questioned and doubted evolution. Silencing the Darwin skeptics and censoring the Darwin skeptics goes into more detail about the discrimination that has resulted as a result of the lead, which was the Scopes trial. Evolution's blunders, frauds, and forgeries. I get into the Piltdown Man and other examples of frauds that were perpetuated, and brought out in the Scopes trial. Evolution's dangerous ideas. Again, I cover eugenics and lobotomies. They thought that the problems people had was because they had the reptile brain, and you need to separate the higher evolved brain from the reptile brain by literally putting a ice pick through the side of the eyeball and separating the two parts of the brain. Horrible experiments. Now it has been proven to be a fraud, but nonetheless, it was for years accepted as valid medicine. C.S. Lewis War, I talk about the fact that C.S. Lewis hated communism and scientism and other totalitarian movements, and he was very effective in criticizing Darwinism, and he explained in detail why it is wrong. Although he didn't focus on the biology, he focused on the philosophical implications of the theory of evolution. And this is my book, The Dark Side of Charles Darwin, where I show clearly that Darwin perpetuated the ideas of racism, and of course one result of that was the Scopes trial. Another example, Darwinian eugenics and the Holocaust, showing that American industrial involvement was important in the Holocaust, especially IBM. IBM was able to move the trains around in time and cause the Holocaust. And here are the three pillars of evolution demolished, which are mutations, natural selection, and abiogenesis. And I show that these claims are wrong. Permission to use this video. The author grants permission for anyone to show this video if it's free to the public, and money is not to be made from its showing.